price that good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. Plato's Republic. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 5 of the GapFillers podcast. My name is Michael Bradford. First thing I want to do is let you all know that there is a Facebook page officially up. It's the GapFillers podcast on Facebook, and on X, it's GapFillers podcast or at GapFillers 1776. I would also like to thank everyone who has followed that page, and if you would like to keep updated on more minor and minute details or articles I share over there, I'll share that on Facebook, and between that and X. I can't do 5 different things because then I would be pretty much nonstop just be posting, and I don't want to do that. I would rather put out more quality content as opposed to quantity. I don't want to I don't want to be like West 2 News or Fox 35 or any of the local channels that put out way too much and really aren't able to cover anything. So I want to be able to highlight a few stories throughout the week. I'm going to try to do at least 1 or 2 a day. Some of it's going to be fluff, but most of it is going to be highly relatable content. I hope it all is mostly relevant and help you to stay informed, making local decisions, and basically taking more power back from governments. And that's pretty much why I used that quote today from Plato's Republic. Is too many times in government we focus on big picture stuff when it's the really minor things. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you will. So I really hope to focus more people onto local politics and have that be a center for debate, as opposed to trying to enforce your will on an entire country's worth of population. It would be easier for a community to govern itself as opposed to trying to, make a bureau. That's what led to this bureaucratic nightmare that we have in the federal government, really. And I hope that county and individuals would take responsibility for themselves, but that communities would govern themselves, and counties and states and cities would take responsibility and leave the federal government to be just that, a federal government, as opposed to this big state we have now, where if it's your smallest will has to be enforced at the federal government, and the states have very minor and the counties have very minor things that they focus on, and then they focus on it way too heavily. Like building regulations and stuff like that are most of that is actually at the state and local level, and so there are very minor things that you don't realize that you're not, that liberties that are taken away from you at local levels that you're not, most of us aren't even aware of. Some are old, outdated laws. Some are ridiculous, like spitting on a sidewalk in Kissimmee is technically illegal. It was because back in the 1800s, when people chewed tobacco and sidewalks were wood, so it's a leftover law. If last time I looked, this was a while ago. It might still be on the books, but there's a lot to get into. Nationally, a lot of deportations taking place. Florida is trying to help President Trump out, but there's a dispute going on between Governor DeSantis and the legislature on how to go about that. It's not that if it happens, it's how much will happen. I'll focus a little bit on that. A little state news, but in a different state, in the state of Iowa, one of the counties, one of the districts that President Trump won by 21 points, the Democrats were able to flip, not 3 months later, and that is due highly to the amount of indifference that people have to their local politics, and that is how the steam just gets the wind gets taken out of a movement's sails, is by indifference. And so I'll focus a little bit on that, and then I want to focus lastly on the Jones Act, which here in Florida is heavily influential because we are a peninsula, and we trade with Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and we also have cruise ships, which I actually learned recently that doesn't technically fall under the Jones Act, but it has its own rules. And if you've ever been on a cruise ship, most cruise ships are not actually run by American sailors, and they don't fly under an American flag, and that is because it's not efficient to. And if you realize most places you actually don't ever take a cruise to another American port, it's almost always a foreign port like the Bahamas or Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands or even Haiti. There's places that people go other than Florida or American territories, and that's because of this act. It's called the Passenger Service Vessel Act, and we'll focus a little bit on that, and let's get started. But first, if like I said, but at the beginning of this, if you want to support this podcast, following it on Facebook, following it on X, and then especially following it on Spotify would help manipulate the algorithms a little bit to boost this as a suggested program. I appreciate everyone who's been listening consistently. I've had okay numbers. The first episode, ironically, is my worst episode, and that's what everyone has listened to. But if I hope to continue to get better and make a better product and information, and so this first one is from The Hill. It's an article from The Hill reporting on the Iowa State Senate seat flip. Democrat Mike Zimmer, who has worked in education and serves as the president of a school board, defeated the Republican candidate Kate Whittington by about 3.5 points to represent State Senate District 35, which voted for Trump by 21 points in 2024. The special election was held to fill the seat vacated by Lieutenant Governor Chris Cornier, who resigned from her seat in December to become the second highest official in the state under Governor Kim Reynolds. Zimmer, who will now serve for the remainder of Cornier's term until 2026. All right, so for 2 full years, this state has this district has a Democrat where a Republican could have easily been. And this is in no doubt because people think it's time to relax and rest on our laurels, and that's when we need to be the most prepared, is most vigilant. If you are wanting to be a republic, you always must maintain vigilance. It never ends, and that's one of the downfalls of being a republic, is you have to maintain 300 million people that have to maintain vigilance and awareness in their political system, or else we just have an oligarchy. Luckily for Iowa, and is a GOP supermajority in both houses. In fact, there are 20 GOP supermajorities and only 9 Democrat supermajorities throughout the country. Some notable ones are actually missing from this list. Like Mississippi is not a supermajority, which I found completely odd. Florida is a supermajority for the Republicans. And of course, you got Illinois, California, and New York are all supermajorities for the Democrats, along with Maryland and Delaware and a few others. So this ends up being a problem, though, especially if you're in a place like Kansas, where they only have a 1-2 vote, or excuse me, apologize. North Carolina only has a one point supermajority, and they have a Democratic governor. So right now, this supermajority is actually holding out and benefiting them because it enables the legislature to still legislate around the Democratic governor in North Carolina, and North Carolina is continually shifting more blue because you get a group of people called halfbacks. these are groups of people from New York that move down to Florida and then they move halfway back, which is New York or North Carolina. So they call them halfbacks, and they primarily are in the Charlotte area, and some of them are actually in Asheville too. If you've ever been to Asheville, pre-flood, I'm not sure how it is now, but it was fairly liberal. It was a very hipster-esque kind of city, surrounded by old good old boys, but the city of Asheville itself was pretty liberal. So this is the importance. I can't stress this enough of focusing on local politics. You can't rely on your local news, especially your national news, to notify you about this, especially because it's a state Senate seat. No national government or no national cable news source is going to cover that, and so you have to consistently be aware of your own local politics. It's just something that you have to do in a republic. I would rather have it been you have to do those, and there is a general election this year for some small national state or national government thing that doesn't matter. I'd rather it be local, but there's a quote in The Patriot: "Why would I trade one tyrant 1,000 miles away for 1,000 tyrants 1 mile away?" It doesn't make any sense, So you have to be consistently vigilant in a republic. It's just the way it is. So people of Iowa need to wake up, and in 2026, when that seat is back up for election, need to be prepared to take it back. But like I said before, I'm not really a Republican, full-on Republican guy, because I think the Republicans have a ton of problems, primarily on not being strong enough. When it comes to a lot of they don't have backbones. When it comes to spending, especially, it is a huge thing. So I just because they have a R by their name doesn't make them good. But with a D by their name, they're pretty close to always being bad. That's just the way the majority of politics works. You got a duality of parties, and that's the way. That's the way the system kind of works right now. I'd prefer to see something like ranked majority or ranked voting. I forget what the full term is, but where you can list the least objectionable people for things. But and this is one of the reasons why Trump was so popular this time around, not just because of Biden and a terrible Biden term and a terrible candidate in Harris. Trump really put together a coalition, kind of like a parliamentary coalition to get prime minister, where where if they don't have over 50% to form a government, they have to convince other parties to vote for them, and then the other parties get concessions. Trump kind of did that with the Libertarian Party, especially with the freeing of Ross Ulbricht. That was his big thing that he could follow through on. Other stuff he's been really libertarian on is getting rid of. He keeps on floating it around. It's going to be really difficult, and pretty much nigh impossible to do. But I would much prefer this being the style of rhetoric coming from anybody, is getting rid of the income tax once and for all. it's the most direct and most oppressive tax there is, because it's taxed directly from your income as opposed to further away from your paycheck. So, all right. So that's really all I have to say about that. Pay attention to your local politics. There was actually a thing in North Florida to replace Nat Gates, and I'm ashamed I didn't know about that one. Of course, I don't live in North Florida, but there's now two people running in that primary to replace him, and I'll get to that probably next week. Really, the big topic this week, though, in the Florida legislature, is the immigration bill. What to do with illegal immigrants? DeSantis has already signed up Florida as the staging post to put them to ship them to Guantanamo Bay as a permanent holding area until they can get deported to their country of origin, or if they're dangerous criminals, keeping them there permanently. Apparently, this hasn't been a new idea. A few other presidents before, I think even Clinton, had used them as a holding cell for detainees of not just terrorists. Terrorists was the big one under Bush, but others, especially in the deportation or non-citizen realm. Guantanamo Bay, for those of you who don't know, is on the southeast side of Cuba. So it's kind of funny because we view Cuba as an enemy, only 99 miles south off the coast of Key West, but we've had a Marine military base there for what, almost forever, 50 years at the minimum, since Cuba, or since Cuba became communist. And then before that, that was more than 50 years. Actually, it's more like 60 years now. But before that, with during the Spanish-American War, I believe that's where we've maintained a military presence on the island in supporting Batista, that regime. So, anyway, so the state legislature has been kind of feuding. Perez, the Speaker of the House, Florida House, is classifying as not a feud but a disagreement. I think Perez is probably setting up for a gubernatorial run here in the next couple of years, or probably in the next year and a half, after DeSantis is term limited, which is a pretty good thing that Florida has. It kind of hurts because we get a good governor in like DeSantis, but it also keeps a bad governor out like Charlie Crist. Charlie Crist was a flip-flopper. He was a Republican, then he ran as an independent against Red Scott. Then he ran as a Democrat, then he flipped out to independent, and he's flipped parties like 5 different times. But there is a certain let me see here. So since 1992, Florida has an 8-year limit on all state officials. But in 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Thornton decision, ruled against being able to do that for congressional members, people of Congress, and or House and Senate. Basically, states can't set their own term limits for those, which I fully disagree with, because that kind of is a violation of the spirit of the law and this is one of the reasons I disagree fully with the 17th Amendment, which is the direct popular vote of senators, as opposed to most. When the 17th Amendment was passed, most senators were elected by popular vote, anyways. But I fully believe that they should be voted for or elected by the state legislatures, however you form that, whether it's the one house or the two. But originally they were supposed to be appointed by the governor, and then kind of like a cabinet position of sorts, kind of representing a state as a whole in Congress, as opposed to kind of like a odd member of the House. whereas the House has each state only has can have up to from 1 to 50 some odd votes or whatever. Each state only gets 2 senators. So I think we should go back to repealing the 17th, throw the 16th in there anyways, the income tax, and so 23 states had term limits, and the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision in 1995 overruled them. But back to this immigration bill. One of the things that DeSantis doesn't like about the bill is that it doesn't mandate law enforcement compliance at the local level. So if you have a citizenry, I don't know, maybe in maybe Orange County or Orlando for that matter, we're actually maybe Gainesville, a couple other places, but Orlando actually tends to be the most liberal city in Florida now, whereas Miami-Dade has gone Republican for the last 2 elections, which is a major flip in the past 2. But a lot of it, Broward County is still heavily Democratic, but the problem is that that brings into maybe Supreme Court rulings and stuff like that, jurisdictions, whereas the federal government kind of has a little bit more leniency on that because they have jurisdiction over immigration as a whole, whereas a state only has really a support level kind of role on it. So that might be end up being a legal battle. So that may be the big reason why Perez doesn't want to go along with it. It also kind of it also puts the role away from the governor, enforcement away from the governor, and puts it under the agriculture department, which is in Florida a totally different. It's a separate department and really controlled by the legislature for the most part. But it has its own kind of governor of its own, which I'm not sure if it's still Democratic, but a couple years ago it went Democratic. And it's an odd place because Florida has a unique agricultural base because it's heavily there's not a ton of agriculture in Florida anymore when it comes to oranges or stuff like that. In fact, one of the largest orange producers just closed down last month, I believe. But the agricultural department is responsible for certifying gas pumps of all things. So they have a unique bureaucratic role, and they're state elected. So it's almost like a quasi governor role in enforcement. So, but DeSantis is wanting to save face after his after losing in the primary to Trump, and he's going to have an odd 2 years before he can make a run for the president again, if that's what he's planning on doing. He might try to run for senator, but that's probably not going to happen. Rick Scott seems like he's fairly well entrenched in this lady. I forget her name right off the top of my head. Her name is Ashley Moore. Great. Seems to be a great choice for to be governor or senator rather. I'm impressed by her rhetoric, at least. I don't know too much about her, and she was the attorney general for Florida under DeSantis, but I am very curious to see how she does in the Senate. It seems to be, again, like I said, her rhetoric seems to really be good, kind of like a Rand Paul-esque kind of what I hoped DeSantis running for president would have looked like. I was fairly disappointed in, and he kind of mellowed out a lot of his stuff trying to appeal to too many people, especially donors, and kind of became a Jeb Bush kind of figure, which I'm not a fan of Jeb Bush at all. He ran, when he was governor of Florida, he was okay, but there wasn't too many great things to say about Bush, or Rick Scott for that matter was okay too. Ron DeSantis was the first governor I've really been impressed with here in Florida. But in the past year, I've kind of mellowed out a little bit on him, especially after finding out about his FWC commission picks. I'm very disappointed with those. It reeks of cronyism. There's a village. The Villages has one of their real estate developers on the board, along with a couple others. I think there's like 6 on the board in total, and 5 of them are fairly okay. Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. I mentioned this a little bit last week, and I've started to really mellow out on that. I've started to ferment a decision on it. Yeah, I don't like that at all. It's not right to have a real estate developer. It's cronyism is really what it ends up being. It ends up being hey, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I give you the power over a place where you can direct legislation, especially for making golf courses on public land. That's just absurd. You know how much fertilizer goes onto a golf course, and all that runoff goes right into the waterways where almost every Florida wildlife place is. It's not like it's the middle of the desert where the water there's not a lot of direct waterways. If in Volusia County, I saw a map the other day where there was quite a few in Volusia County, which the St. John, right adjacent to the St. John's, and that would only cause more runoff and possible algae blooms in the river, and I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. The St. John's is one of the main vital waterways in central or in the state of Florida. Between that and the Everglades and we already have a little bit of that problem, or every few years it pops up with the Kissimmee River Basin and the water runoff into the Everglades from the sugar industry in South Florida, creating algae blooms in the Gulf and really creating a mess for the wildlife over there. So between that and the St. John's, those are the 2 major waterways, and that will create a huge problem. For our in fact, if you want to maintain a tourist industry in Florida, our beaches are our primary cheap, semi cheap at least, resource. Instead of Disney. But I like spending my time in the swamp and grasslands more than those areas because tourists. But either way, it's not a good thing, not a good place to have these things, golf courses and all. Anyways, back to the immigration thing. On the according to the House membership, which it passed with every Republican except for one. So it at least seems for now they have a supermajority, so a veto proof. So it seems like they're going to be able to override any veto DeSantis will hand down. But they're calling it the Trump Act in Florida, and a couple key highlights is making strict crimes for illegal aliens. So it would basically move everything up once. So kind of like a what? So if it's a misdemeanor 3, it goes into a 2, and then 2 to a 1, and then a class 1 misdemeanor rather gets moved into a class 3 felony. So it kind of moves everything up the ranks and allows them to be targeted for deportation by ICE a little bit quicker because of that. It also, criminalizes coordinated efforts to aid or solicit an illegal alien to vote. And so that would be kind of geared towards protecting the votes of American citizens. Let's see here. Requiring the State Immigration Enforcement Council to create a strategy to increase the number of beds to aid in deportation. So it really looks like Florida is trying to be the head of the deportation effort. Whether who gets the benefit for that, Trump will probably get the benefit or get the credit rather. Let's see. Also, it repeals all in-state tuition for illegal aliens beginning on July 1st. It appropriates over $500 million to assist state and local law enforcement agencies in their fight against illegal immigration. Creating the local law enforcement immigration grant program to award grants to local law enforcement agencies and county detention facilities to support their cooperation with federal immigration agencies. So, yeah, one of my questions for the legislature would be if we're expecting subsidies from the government or from the federal government because it's a national program, and if we're going to be a launch point, because we're pretty much a border state, if we're going to have that program subsidized. I know we've been running surpluses for a while now here in Florida, but that doesn't mean we should subsidize other states making poor choices. So I'm very curious on that. So I'll keep you posted. Right now they're all in debate, so both the House bills and the Senate bills are still kind of in limbo. But DeSantis has also threatened to veto them, so we'll see. But they're also wanting to move quickly. So I don't see this getting hung up. I see this kind of like a big, seeing, who can come out the top dog. And, I think, like I said, I think Perez might be trying to gear up, kind of like Marco Rubio did, to launch into the Senate, launch him into the Senate from the Speaker of the House. I think that might be what he's aiming at. He's our second big state house guy from Miami. So Miami's kind of holding down the fort rather on this as the speakership. Anyways, so the last thing I want to talk about today is the Jones Act and the Passenger Service Act and how that affects Florida. So first, what is the Jones Act? The Jones Act was first passed in the 1920s to prevent U.S. shipping from declining drastically after World War I. During World War I, the U.S. really had an economic boom in shipping because we stayed out of World War I for so long. Our manufacturing sector was basically single-handedly keeping the Allies afloat. And same thing happened in World War II. But back then we had 600 some odd vessels that would have been Jones Act compliant. Now, in 1983, or 1983 rather, we had 200. Now we only have 92. So 92 ships to service all U.S. ports, U.S. port to U.S. ports. It was a highly protectionist policy that, as usual, killed two industries with one stone. Instead of saving one industry, they killed both. It was trying to save the shipbuilders industry and the maritime industry, and so in doing so, they killed. That's typical fashion. And instead of being competitive and finding a way to be competitive, we've basically said, no, if you're going from U.S. port to U.S. port, you have to be under a U.S. made flag, a U.S. made ship of, it's like 80% of the ship has to be made in the U.S., 80% crude from the U.S. and fly under U.S. flag. So I 100% agree with the flying under the U.S. flag, duh. But what ends up happening is that the regulations, especially the work regulations in America, are not as stringent. So what ends up happening is these other places are the other ships, cruise ships or vessel or freight vessels. Because the PVSA basically mirrors the Jones Act, just in the way of being commercial passenger as opposed to freight. And so what ends up happening is these under foreign flags and paying taxes to their governments. Bahamas is a big one. But if Trump really wants to hurt Panama, we could target the Jones Act and bring domesticate uh, uh, Panamanian ships by getting rid of the Jones Act. Those are the two biggest certifications or certifiers or whatever you want to call it of shipping and passenger ships is Panama. So if we get rid of the Jones Act and Trump wants to go after them for the Panama Canal, which I am cautiously for. I think it's a very strategic point in the U.S., especially for navies and stuff like that, and economic trade, really. But it would help to get rid of the Jones Act. That would help, with Panama traffic. Because it would something from going from California to Florida would probably be easier to ship over water as opposed to train or by truck, especially by truck. And so it would also help with oil freighters. In fact, there was a Hawaiian representative at the beginning of the let's see here, where is it? So the Jones Act fleet size and condition has affected U.S. foreign policy. For example, during the Russian oil embargo, Hawaii Democrat asked President Biden, he asked President Biden to waive the Jones Act requirements, specifically for oil to Hawaii, and this would greatly change the way that we ship products and make everything more efficient, probably cheaper, especially in overseas non-continental U.S. territories like Hawaii, like Alaska, like Puerto Rico. It's cost almost 30 to 50% more, if not 100% more, to buy something in Alaska, in Anchorage of all places. It's not like it's a backwoods place where you have to fly in goods or whatever. Now, that's obviously going to be more expensive, but we're talking about a port city in Alaska. It should be fairly consistently close to U.S., but because there's only 92 vessels that are able to ship goods from California or Washington up to Alaska and ship oil down from Alaska to back to the continental U.S., that becomes a problem. And in doing so, we have basically shot ourselves in the foot to save our finger. We no longer, in fact, we lose the finger too, because the New Jersey steelworks and maritime industry in Newark and the Hudson Bay area is practically non-existent anymore, anyways. So there's no reason to keep the Jones Act around. You can modify it. The Jones Act also applies to in barges and tugboats and stuff like that. I definitely see a reason to keep those around under U.S. owned policy. But when it comes to especially ocean going vessels, there's no reason to have that. Also, I see this as a big reason that the Great Lakes are no longer a shipping industry in and of themselves, which hurts Minnesota and Michigan and Detroit and Wisconsin, and even New York with the Erie Canal. Now they have a St. Lawrence byway there too, which hurt them, but which in turn hurts New York City. If you had smaller ships that were able to be mass produced by another nation and then imported into the U.S., it would help our shipping industry as a whole. So this was definitely a point of strategic maneuvering that I see being possibly a bipartisan bill. Because Hawaii is struggling, Alaska is struggling, Puerto Rico is struggling. Even though it's not a state, you get these overseas territories where they can't ship stuff that we make in the U.S. to reach their ports. They have to import it from somewhere else. Puerto Rico gets most of its food from the U.S. though, so especially if it's a final product, it's basically like paying a tariff to your own country. And so if you want to lower products, if you want to make products in Puerto Rico and improve their economy. Which I have a friend who has people family members on the island, and stuff over there is so much cheap or so much more expensive because they have to pay an exorbitant rate to somebody to ship them over, because it has to be American owned, American run, and I don't see that being a continuing thing with how our current labor policies are. So you can either change the labor policies, which would make American maritime industry more competitive again, or you can get rid of the Jones Act and modify it and possibly bring more ships back under the American flag. So instead of taxes going to pay Panama or Bahamas, you can home and bring onshore that revenue. If Trump seems to be all about finding revenues to get to hurt other places or to hurt other countries, and that would be a perfect way to do it. So I'm highly in favor of that. The libertarian in me also says that that's a dumb reason. Also, it would probably help Florida's cruise industry. You would probably get cruise ships coming down from other places like New York and North Carolina and visiting Florida. So take a cruise to Florida from other states instead of having to have Florida as your main launch point. Make it a destination. Same with Hawaii, or Alaska has, so there are few places that have cruise ships. Like American Cruise Lines is the only, American Cruise Lines is the only one that is fully PSVA or PVSA compliant. But it's not; they're not massive ships. The only ship there's only one ship in the entire on the ocean that is PSVA. PVSA, I keep on switching that, compliant, and that's the Pride of America from Norwegian. All the other ships that dock in Florida are flying under a different flag, primarily Panama and Bahamas. So repealing the Jones Act, or reforming it drastically, and then reforming the PVSA Act, I see as huge points of contention that the Trump can help improve our economy, or Congress can help improve our economy, but Trump can also get his economic maneuverability against Panama. So so with that, I'll leave you with that. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to support the program, follow me on Spotify. Share. This is the only way that the show is going to grow. I'm depending on you to help like comments. There's no it's no trade-off to like, comment, and that will help boost the visibility to other people and help them get the word out. And I appreciate y'all for listening to me, and have a good week.